We're live.
The Dr. Oba Tashaka Show. Free your mind, and the rest will follow. A show for all who are on the journey to discover the truths about their identity, history, culture, politics, spirituality, and family relationships. This is a show for the Black Freedom Movement and the Black Power generation and the hip-hop generation, including Black Lives Matter and associate activists, all of whom are seeking change. Dr. Oba Tashaka and his guests are dropping knowledge and insight from his successful organizing, research, writings, and innovative thoughts, the best of which have piped into God's mind to lift you up higher and higher. To the bosses, OGs, rappers, influencers, and those looking to evolve from the constraints of misinformation and miseducation to build a foundation for personal growth, love, and mental freedom. Check out the wisdom of the OR. Yeah, that's the original revolutionary, Oba T, who inspired 1 million black men with his rousing speech at the Million Man March, and who continues to fight, write, and speak the truth. Dr. Oba Tashaka is one of the deepest deep thinkers in the world today. A quote by Dr. Asa Hilliard. Dr. Oba Tashaka, then Bill Bradley, was the best leader organizer in the Congress of Racial Equality, CORE. An endorsement from Dr. George Wiley, Associate Director of National CORE and the best organizer blacks produced in the 1970s as the organizer of the National Welfare Rights Organization. The Dr. Oba Tashaka Show. Free your mind, and the rest will follow.
Welcome, viewers. How you all doing? How's the family? Going on 5 years of interacting with you. For the viewers, and particularly the new viewers, I want to encourage you to hit the red button. The red button is the subscription button. It just means you're a subscriber. And if you like the show, hit the like button. We're honored today to have a lovely, brilliant, knowledgeable sister, Sister Joy Lynch. Joy, it's a real honor to have you. How are you doing?
It is my pleasure. I'm well. Thank you, Brother Tashaka. How are you today?
I'm doing fine. You know what I mean? Just for viewers' knowledge, Joy is my sister-in-law, which means she's the sister of my wife. And I really had the pleasure, enjoyed the pleasure of you and Pam's son here last week. So that was really joyful. And then you were able to suggest this show. So we were able to cook something up. So double pleasure. So
absolutely.
People are in for a real treat because economic power is no joke. And being broke is definitely not a joke. Y'all know that. And I know Joy knows that. Is that right, Joy?
That's right. I always tell people that being broke is not sexy. It's not sexy.
Not sexy. Yeah, it can mess up all kinds of things. And the system has definitely designed it that way. But I think what you're going to get from Sister Joy is some ideas on how you can empower yourself financially, economically. So that's what this show's about. And I want to encourage people to shape questions as the discussion goes along so that, we can respond to your concerns. So before getting into introducing Joy and getting into the topic, I just wanted to discuss a couple of issues. The first one has to deal with the attack that's just occurred by Israel, the Zionists, against Iran. And there has been an effort by the media to treat this as basically a question of, well, how far can they go? And did they really knock out their nuclear facilities? And oh, they're responding. No discussion about really, do the Israelis have a right to do this? I mean, if it's based on the premise that the Iranians shouldn't have a nuclear weapon, can you explain that irrational assumption? In other words, is America prepared to just they have more nuclear weapons than any country in the world? Is Israel prepared to disarm? And since America is the only country with nuclear weapons that's actually dropped them on a country that wanted to sue for peace, which was Japan during World War II, is America even qualified to engage in this? So this is really showing how serious this issue is. Over 200,000 Palestinians have been buried under the rubble in a genocide that the media in this country and in Europe generally fails to describe as genocide. And then they've been bombing Lebanon and other places. And then apparently Netanyahu came to the White House to seek approval for this bombing and didn't get it and went ahead and did it anyway. That appears to be the case. And as a result, the tail is wagging the dog. You know, America's supposed to be the big dog, but now Trump is talking about, well, to Iran, you better negotiate a deal now or things can get worse. When he knows you can't negotiate, the country you're trying to negotiate with is under fire. So this is wrong, and it indicates just how far Israel's prepared to go, and it's likely to heat up and be worse. You've seen the retaliation from Iran, but our main concern is the Palestinian people and the loss of life, and the fact that not war but genocide needs to stop. The second thing that I just wanted to make note of is the provocative moves that the president has made around deportation in LA that has sparked movements in other parts of the country. And for those people from the Latino community who voted for Trump and said when they voted for him that they're the good Latinos and they would not be concerned about Trump doing anything against them. Well, now you're seeing the so-called good Latinos, including the senator from California, being arrested, manhandled, when he has a right to go into any federal facility and inspect it, being treated like a criminal. And so those demonstrations have sparked demonstrations in other parts of the country, but they've also served the move by Trump, because I think Trump is using this to appeal to his base, to show that he's cracking down on people of color. And so this is a distraction also away from what's really happening in the Senate, where they're getting ready to pass a big ugly bill that Trump calls the big beautiful bill. And that bill is going to take as many as 14 million people off of Medicaid. They've done it in a very slick way. And so the people are being lied to. Everything's being done to cover this up, but there are huge cuts in SNAP, huge cuts in rent supplements. A lot of people who are only able to afford rent in big cities like San Francisco or New York or many parts of the country will find after a period of time, a lot of those benefits are gone. And there are many other cuts in this bill, which is the biggest transfer of wealth from the poor to the rich in the history of this country. This is not the first transfer. This country's good at transferring. And so the people have been brainwashed in this country to call anything that's a benefit socialism, except they'll say they don't want you to touch their Social Security. They don't want you to touch their Medicare or their Medicaid. But as one great scholar, Gore Vidal, said, and he's a brilliant man, he's no longer alive, he said, what you have in America is socialism for the rich and capitalism for the poor. And what he meant by that is the rich are on the dole. They made their wealth off the federal government. And the poor, they are left with this philosophy of capitalism that if anything goes wrong, you should take care of yourself. But when 2008 occurred, the economy collapsed, the rich got rescued, and 40% of Blacks lost their housing because nothing was done to save them or other poor people. So all I'm saying is this is going on, and this makes this topic even more important as federal workers have been fired, and a huge number of them Black who had good, secure jobs. And this is a key in terms of economic development. And so this topic for today, building Black power through financial literacy, is timely. So Joy, let's get into this show. What I like to do before we get into a topic is to get into your background, because this is African, not just to talk a subject, but let people know something about yourself. So, and by the way, you have 2 books, Jayla's Juice Bar, right up here.
Yes.
That deals with business development and financial literacy, and a kid's financial dictionary. And you can tell people how you can get this and what you've done with this. But this is a lady who is putting out information to empower you, and very brilliantly aiming a lot of it at the youth. So Joy, why don't you tell people something about your background, your family, where you come from, whatnot.
Thank you, Shaka. Thank you. Thank you once again for having me. So I was born here in New York, where I currently still live. I'm a born and raised New Yorker. However, my parents came from Barbados, both of them. They came here in the late 60s. They got married, bought a house, brought my brother and my 2 sisters, one you know very well, to America, and they lived here my parents lived here for about 20 years before they retired and went back to Barbados. And now we're kind of spread out. I have, my brother's, he lives between New York and Barbados. I have a sister in Canada. So, but we all grew up here in New York. So, yeah.
So, were there any things with your parents, your father, your mother, that influenced you in terms of what you're doing today?
Well, I definitely say my father particularly. I always say he was a big influence in terms of my love for numbers. He would come home. He used to work for the telephone company. My father had a very brilliant mind. He was very analytical. So if I got anything from him, I think I did get a part of that. And he would always help me with my math homework. He was always stressed to me how important it was that I know my fractions, my multiplication tables. He even put the multiplication tables all over my bedroom walls to make sure I remember them. And I always thank him for that, because I think he caught me somewhere around third grade. And if he hadn't, I might not be the numbers genius I am today. Because I was having so much problem, especially problem solving, algebra. It just, I couldn't get it. But the one thing that he told me is think. You have to think, just solve, talk it out, solve the problem. I went to math and science high school, and so numbers were always just something around me. I studied accounting in college, and then over the years, I just I did some bookkeeping. I branched out into doing taxes. And so that's all led me to here. I worked with many small businesses and individuals, helping them with their financial matters. And then I created the Joy of Numbers. If it doesn't get it, I guess you get the little play on the names, Joy of Numbers. And so the Joy of Numbers is a collection of books and programs that are all designed to teach financial literacy and math skills through hands-on learning and creativity. That was the whole goal. So here I am.
I find it interesting that you're into counting and stuff, and then your sister is in Canada too, right?
Yes, actually, she was my influence when becoming an accountant. When I said I'm going to be an accountant like my sister, so that was huge. She did help influence that. Yes.
Okay, and then you have a cousin that also, or a relative, who lives in New York, who also does taxes and stuff like that.
She's also a CPA. We worked together during the tax season. Yeah, she was very helpful in helping me when I first started out doing taxes. I definitely have to give her credit for helping me, starting me out and answering my ton of questions about taxes and tax law. Not the most exciting thing we could talk about, but me and her could talk about it for days.
Well, that you're also showing that in terms of economic development or anything we do, you can't separate the family from that. And in this case, family endowments definitely help, because I've heard quite a bit about your father, and he was an interesting guy, a former Garveyite.
That's correct.
And into the Rosicrucians, so he had African consciousness and somebody
Indeed.
not to mess with, and then also a musician. Played every kind of instrument. So I thought that was interesting. You know what I mean? Did you pick up musical interest from him?
I did. I used to play the piano. I played the guitar. I don't play much instruments now as an adult, unfortunately. However, I did have a stint in the music business. I did that for a while after college, when accounting didn't seem as exciting. When you're young, when you're 22, debits and credits are not the most exciting things in the world, I tell you. But what I did, when I came out of college, I made a decision to work for creative companies, music companies. I thought about what is the thing that I love, and I did love music. Still, it is a big part of my life. So I started to work for record labels and music companies, booking agencies. I worked for a couple of those. Then I went into even doing, led me into the club business, doing music production, shows. So I did that for a while. And even then, working at clubs, I was still the one in the background working on the numbers, keeping the books, collecting the money. That's kind of always been my thing. And then after, club business is great and fun, but you don't get a lot of sleep. You don't sleep much at night.
Yeah,
so,
right.
So after a while of that, I kind of gave up that and started doing more of accounting. And I got a couple of bookkeeping clients, and then I got a few tax clients. And then so that's what I've been doing now for the last 20 years or so, just, working with small businesses and individuals, trying to, bring some color, as my company suggests, Colors Consulting Group, into their financial lives.
So you're president of Colors Consulting Group.
President and owner. Yes, sir.
Yeah, right on. That's why that's important.
Ownership. Ownership is important, and that is one of the things that is especially important. And I think mostly anything I would say is especially important in our communities, where ownership, because you want to own the building, the business, and the decisions. And that way it gives you more visibility. It gives you more longevity. It gives you something to pass on for next generations, and just to help build that lovely term that we hear so much about, generational wealth. So it's important to own. Yes, sir.
Yeah, especially since generational wealth is, particularly through real estate, only been possible over a short period of time, since we were denied the opportunity to get federal loans. You know what I mean?
Correct. That's right.
Yeah. And I mean, that really shows that if you call yourself a citizen of the United States, then you need to put it in hyphens, because really, if you're excluded from the central things that are important in life, and one of which is the effort to have some kind of financial power and security, then what kind of citizen are you? And when the federal government is laying it down, and then every other part of society is, and then the other benefits that generally go along with being a citizen. So Malcolm had a saying, he said, if you sit at the table and everybody else has got a meal and all you've got is crumbs, does that make you a diner? You know what I mean? So now we have the opportunity, better take advantage of it,
Yeah, now we want to build the table. We want to own the table, not just sit at it. We want to own that table. That's right. And I mean, that's why I do what I do, because one of the ways of getting there is by knowing, knowledge is power, right? And so financial literacy is something that we all need. I love to say that money is a skill, and it's a skill that we use our whole life. So the sooner we learn about it, the better, which is why I center most of my work towards the youth. And as I mentioned to you earlier, to help even to avoid some of the mistakes even myself have made, not knowing, when I look back at it, I say, well, wow, if I had done this, if I had known that, I would have done that. And so I think it's important that we start these conversations with our kids from early, teaching them about money, teaching them more. It's funny, whenever I talk about this with parents, the first thing they tell me, like, yes, can you teach my kids how to save and not spend? But it's to teach them that it's more about, more than about spending. It's about saving. It's about budgeting. And what is also, I think, key in it is also about giving back to your community.
Yeah, and this discussion is being cast on a number of levels. Like, you are really focusing on the future, which is our youth, and I think that's correct, and it's also brilliant. And your two books are directed towards youth, because if you get to the youth, then that becomes something that can be passed on from generation to generation. So I think that's brilliant. And right now, since 1968, we've been going through the second post-Reconstruction, where the gains that were made in the second Reconstruction, starting in the 50s, Black freedom movement in the South, and then up here in the Black Power movement, those are being attacked. And you're seeing a heavy attack on them now with this administration. And then with other forces that have hit our communities, some communities have dissolved deliberately because the system moved to wipe them out because they saw those as places of resistance. So Harlem right now ain't the Harlem that it used to be. The Fillmore basically has been wiped out, which is the most conscious of the Black communities in the Bay Area, at least in the 60s, the Panthers and Oakland later. So financial literacy, economic development is a key part of what we need to do to rebuild our families and our communities. And I would say it's more than interesting that sisters play a very important part in this because, like you're talking about your interest in numbers, I found that in organizing, generally it's the sisters whose idea of power is the money. And usually they're the ones that are playing the role as treasurer. They're the ones
Correct.
that are, seeing that it's handled properly and that kind of stuff, along with a lot of other things, because as my best friend, Candy Solowazi says, sisters make things happen. So that's generally the truth. So is there more you want to say on financial literacy in terms of what it means and why it's important?
Well, yeah, I mean, as I said, knowing, you know, more than just how to count and numbers, knowing, predatory lending products, these things, especially in our community, redlining, knowing helps you to build credit and qualify for loans, to purchase homes and start businesses, to plan for retirement and invest in the future and invest in your communities. So it's important that you know these things and how all the ways that your money can work for you as well. So it matters. And again, as I said, it also matters in our communities for economic independence and community resilience. And when we invest in our own communities, we don't have to ask for help from others. So it helps to build everything from within just by, once we start to understand and be able to use our money in better ways, instead of, when you don't understand money, sometimes you wind up living paycheck to paycheck. You don't know how to budget. You don't know how to use your credit wisely. So it's important for us, again, as I said, and the earlier we learn these things, one of the things that they say, and up until recently, it was only about 17 states that required financial education in school. So they're not really teaching it in the schools. I think it's up to 25 states. I read the last statistic I read on that. But it obviously, as you keep saying, it affects these things impact our communities even more so. So it's important that we know these things, to learn how to create and stick to a budget, understand debt, as I said, to use your credit wisely, and just to be able to make more informed decisions.
Yeah, your point about education in this country is really set up to dumb people down. It's set up that way, and to make people compliant and to make them consumers,
Right.
and to also make them open to anything the system wants them to do so you don't think too much. And that's generally how education is set up. Now, you're talking about savings. I hear a lot of Black people talk about how important it is to be able to spend. And that's their goal in life, is to be able to spend. And then if you watch the media, it's all about getting your money.
That's right.
Every ad, every commercial is designed to get you to take what's in your pocket out, whether it's a hamburger or whether it's clothes. always advertised by women. It's almost like the implication is if you get the clothes, you'll get the woman or cars or whatever. So, could you go in a little bit more into savings and how that works both for the individual and for the couple in a relationship or extended families? How do you get people on that path where they see the value of saving?
Well, I think one of the things that I incorporate into my program to start with, again, start from young, is to be able to, for kids, young people, to identify needs and wants, what we need versus what we want, and that also helps to show them, well, if you want something, now there's nothing wrong with wanting, but you also may need to save for that. And so putting aside money for something that you want. And so that's kind of the basic thing that I start with when in terms of teaching kids. And then it goes throughout my books and my program, my worksheets. I also have created all these worksheets that help to bring those kind of those theories across to the kids. And then in terms of when we get older and we're working, understanding again what we're saving for. One of the things I tell people a lot about is the future. It's not just about now, it is about the future. And I know sometimes I hear people are not so sure about the future, but I can tell you that I wasn't so sure about it either when I was 21. And now that I'm a woman of a certain age, I can tell you the future does happen and you need to be prepared for it. so, find ways in terms, and one of the things I advise my clients, especially the younger ones, is like, or even anyone, because I know money is such a thing that once you get it, it's so tempting to spend it. So I say, put it away, buy, invest. And when you get into investment, leave your money. Investing is not it's a long-term game. You put your money in today. It's not to take out tomorrow. It's to, leave it and let it work. There's a beautiful thing called compound interest that works for your money. And it double, it grows, but it needs time. Time is the key factor there. Tricks like automating your savings, putting, as soon as put it into an account before you even get in your paycheck. Invest put it into investments, IRAs. If you have a job and they offer a 401k, definitely use that to your advantage, especially if they're matching. That's free money. That, in terms of that they're giving you, they're going to match dollar for dollar. That is money that will be non-taxable later on in your retirement. So there's a lot of ways to save, and I think another key thing is to think more simply. As you said, you don't need the latest, newest. I mean, we all like to have, we all do. It's an instinct that we all have. But sometimes we have to sacrifice for the greater good. And I mean, you don't have to what's the word? I'm just sorry. I lost the word I was thinking for, but you don't have to deny yourself. That's the word. Pleasure, but you don't have to spend it on everything either. And so, saving these money, putting money, and then I think investing in our communities is another way to save, and not just by money, by time, helping, mentoring young people, supporting your local business. That, to me, those are all things that help to grow, and in terms of saving, they help to grow and save us for things for the future. So
yeah, those are real good practical things. Those have been basically my practice when I first married. We had a policy. And by the way, I would say in a family, whoever handles money the best, or whoever handles the money well, and hopefully someone does, because you're in trouble if no one does. That
Agreed.
person should be in charge. It doesn't mean they make decisions on where the money goes. That should be joint
Correct.
by consensus. But that person should be in charge. That person needs to be trustworthy and responsible. Because if two people are working, you're not going to be messing with your mate's money, and you shouldn't be playing with yours. So whoever handles the best, let them handle it under policy. So in my marriage, we had a policy. We each got an allowance of $150 a month. That was the allowance. All of my wife's money went in the bank. And since I paid the bill, everything after that went in the bank. And so for me, the reason for that is freedom. The reason is when you have enough resources, you're free to do whatever you want to do that involves cost to it, because freedom is a lot more than money. But anything that's got to do with cost to it. Also, when you're able to secure yourself financially, you remove one of the biggest causes of stress, which is financial. And in a relationship, financial conflict. And it can happen anyway because of the nature of poverty that's endemic to being under what I call a semi-colonial system, where underdevelopment is the policy of the government, of the people that run the economy. So you get paid less usually on a job than whites do. You're the last hired and the first fired and all that stuff. So all of that happens. So if you're not able to have a policy, a set of policies to make you independent financially, then you're really going to fall into it. And I think your point about needs and wants, I think that point is really important, because too many of us go on wants. So
That's
one of
correct.
my policies in life has been to avoid new cars. I bought one because I needed to have the smell and all that stuff. And I found out it's not good for your health. That smell that you get from
Really?
your car isn't really good for your health. But that's a depreciating asset. So as soon as you buy it, it loses its value. Unless you
As
find.
soon as you drive it off the floor. My dad used to tell me that.
Did your father buy new or used cars?
He bought used.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, my father was definitely prudent as well. I would say we used to even call him cheap, but he wasn't cheap. He just didn't spend bad money. I can tell you that. He didn't. He never. Yeah, I think he had one new car he bought when he first came here. When he first moved, they lived in Brooklyn, and then he moved to Queens, and he bought a new car, a Plymouth Satellite. I remember that car. And then after that, he only bought secondhand as well. But you also brought up a point there about couples, that, yeah, one of the things I tell couples too is that you have to identify who's, as you said, who's the spender and who's the saver, because we all have a personality type. And a lot of times our money, we have issues with money that stem back to our childhood that we're not even realizing, from either not having or sometimes even having too much, not understanding about, discretion and saving. And so sometimes, we have issues because we grew up seeing our mom struggle and didn't, and she never taught us why she, what was the struggle. And so we didn't understand how money works. So, and money is one of the biggest issues in a relationship. So those are definitely conversations. I tell people to sit down and make a plan. So what you described with you and my sister, I think, was absolutely great, that at least you sat down and had those conversations and made the plan and say, well, we're going to work within this budget and we're going to stick to it. And we're, and it helps to hold each other accountable. So, good for you guys. That probably cut down a lot of fighting.
That was my first relationship. With Pam, it works a little different, but in both cases, it's about accumulating reserves. And another thing I'd say is you always have to look at your income and your expenses and make sure that you always have reserves and don't do things that knock you out of continuing to build the reserves. So you can enjoy a life and do things, but just don't go overboard on it. And I think another thing, a point you were making about the future, I think that's real important. And under oppression, we often think we're almost entitled not to think about it. We
That's right.
almost glory in the fact that in the movement, we'd say, I'm not so sure I'll be here after 30. And we talk about we don't trust anybody over 30. And then live now and don't worry about anything. But you've
Right.
got to think long term and live in the moment. So
That's
having a lot. So I gave my cousin advice years ago. He's a brilliant person. He's my favorite cousin on my father's side, David Johnson. We're both rebels. He's very much like my father, as I am. And so I told him a long time ago, I take the long view on finances. So they had a situation where the mother died, the father had been dead for a while, and they had a property in San Francisco. And of course, the whole family got together. What to do? Well, I had advised him on this before. And so he and his brother bought the family out. And then over time, because his brother lived in the property, he didn't want to sell it. They agreed, the two of them, whoever lived the longest would have it. So now David is sitting on $1.5 million. You know what I mean? But you think long term, you know what I mean?
right.
Depends on how much
Right.
time you think you have left. You never know. But
You don't know.
that I think is crucial. Don't just think in the moment. Think about the future. And then, like you say, own the property. If you own a property, pass it on if you can, you know what I mean? To your family. Certainly to your mate, you know what I mean? So, I mean, that is all important. And, this thing about compound interest, I think that's really important. Make sure that your money goes into something that grows. All that's good advice. I hope people listen to that. And by the way, you want to maintain a good credit rating. I won't ask you
That
what
is
your credit rating is. Is it good?
no, I won't tell you anyway. But it's definitely, I mean, and one of the things again, as I mentioned, I had some of the mistakes that I made. One of those was with, and I mean, let it be a warning to if they still have this practice, is when I was in college. They come around on the college campuses and tell you, oh, you can get a credit card, and I mean, you're 18, 19 years old when you get a credit card, and of course, it's part A, right? So I did make those mistakes in the beginning, in the early parts of my life, and it took me quite a while to help to repair my credit. So if there's any young people listening, college age particularly, your credit score, it matters. It does, it matters. I tell people that all the time because it matters in how much money you spend, how much credit you're worthy of. It will matter when you're trying to buy a home, buy a car. They and even now more so, they even your job, certain jobs check your credit score, insurance companies, all of them. So it matters. It matters.
Yeah, it matters a lot. And that means that you've got to be careful. Don't overload with debt. Number one, because you can't afford it. And number two, it's going to bring down your credit rating. Number three, it can affect your health. You know what I mean? So
all that stress. That's right.
yeah, your health is your wealth. Now, we've heard that a million times. And most people I know who say that, they will put a priority on paying their bills over putting money into things that will enhance their health, for example. You know what I mean? And they think that's responsible. No, it isn't. You come first. Look
That's
after
right.
your health. So,
That's
yeah,
right.
little old things like credit scores, they matter. And part of that is paying the few bills you have on time and then pay them off. My rule is I don't have no credit cards, none whatsoever. You know what I mean? None,
That
zero.
that had to become my rallying cry. I had to say, well, you know what? If I can't pay for it cash, then I don't need it. At least,
Yeah,
for
exactly.
smaller purchases, I try
Exactly.
to, and I lived like that for a while until my credit got better. And I'm trying to definitely be more responsible now, as again on this end of the spectrum now, as opposed to what I was doing when I was 22.
Mhm. And just don't forget the system is set up to turn everybody into consumers, at least the
That's
poor,
right.
the working class, the middle class, and especially us. So consume, as Joyce said, according to need. And every now and then you want to satisfy a want, but not something that's going to put you in trouble. You know what I mean? So yeah, that's important. You talked about budgeting. You want to go into more detail on budgeting in terms of um, how that works for an individual or in a relationship.
Well, one thing I'll say is budget is not a bad word. All right. It's, again, some people don't want to feel like they have to live within a budget. And so, but um, budget is basically living within your means and spending your money wisely, and knowing what you're spending it on. And so creating a budget is probably one of the best things. I guess one of the first steps to creating a budget is to start to know where your money goes. And I'm sure, if you've done any reading on financial, they'll tell you to track your spending for, say, 30 days and write down everything that you've spent your money on. And you'll be surprised when you look back. Sometimes you think you know how much you're spending, but once you start to really actually track it, you would see, wow, I spend a lot more on these things than I thought. And so then you can start to narrow down certain things. The favorite example is those $6 coffees, which are probably like $12 now. Maybe you can cut out a few of those, but basically setting up and say, well, if I have $500 a month to spend, then I'm going to, I know I need to spend 200 on my bills. I need to put 100 away for savings. And in that also is something very important to have is, again, in terms of savings, is that emergency fund. So, put away 3 to 6, they say 3 to 6 months of salary. And I know that can seem to be a lot, but having that cushion is for emergencies. I think, as you just mentioned, could be good for your health because it will alleviate some of the stress when those emergencies come up. But they say pay yourself, make sure you put some money away for savings, and then you can have a budget for those fun things that you want to do, so that so that you're not, again, you shouldn't deny yourself. If you want to take a trip to Tahiti, you should take a trip to Tahiti, but know that, well, think ahead, plan ahead. That is one of the best things. That's what budgeting does for you. Helps you to plan ahead and say, well, I know that I am going to have this amount of money in this amount of time. I'm going to put away X amount because I have a goal in mind. Having that goal in mind is definitely something to strive for. So that gives you even more incentive to save and budget your money.
Yeah, that emergency fund I think is very important, and I think in the beginning you want to have enough so you can survive an emergency. But in the end, your goal is to have enough that you can do whatever you want to do whenever you want to do it. You know what I mean?
Financial freedom. That's correct.
Yeah, that's the real goal. And I'll also say this, that we're living under capitalism. And so, we're living under what I call semi-colonialism, where the system is set up to keep you broke and everything else. And so financial literacy, knowing how to handle the money you have is important. But here's a key thing I also think is very important. I hear people saying, oh, I love my car. I love my house. They love things. Economics, finances, getting your stuff in order is important, but you should only love those things that will love you back. Food, if it's healthy, love it. It's going to keep you alive. A person that's, that you care about, or people that are friends and stuff like that. But don't, in the financial literacy game, as you move up the ladder and get successful, don't fall in love with material things, because it's going to put you in a state where you can become very greedy. And greed is the source of all problems. It's the worst vice of all the vices, because if greed is what consumes you, you'll do almost anything to keep getting more. And that's why you're seeing this great ugly bill and all the other things that the rich have taken everything, but they want more. They're never satisfied with what they have. And we're not going to be like that in terms of having the material stuff. A few of us get quite a bit, but people, as my aunt used to teach her children, people before money. People come first. And that's not to say go and be broke. It's simply to say,
no, that's not to say that.
yeah, those resources you get are for a purpose, to satisfy yourself, your family, to enable them to do something, and to help your people. But don't get caught up in this, I got to have this so much that I love it and all this other stuff, because things can happen and you're tested. And then if you place property first, you might lose your life. Nothing more important than your life. You know what I mean? So
That is correct.
So these things that you're talking about are very practical and easy to do. It's a matter of really sticking to it. You talked about credit. Any other things you want to say about how people accumulate credit, good credit?
Excuse me. Sorry. You said accumulate credit?
Yeah, any other things that you can suggest in terms of getting good credit?
Excuse me, I'm so sorry.
All right.
One of the things that we were talking about in terms of business entrepreneurship and starting a business is that also having a business can help you build credit as well. So starting a business can give you more control over your money, as opposed to working for someone. Having being able to build corporate credit, which will allow you to have more funds for your business and allow you to do more as a business. So, and it works the same way as personal credit, except that now it's on a larger scale. And obviously, same thing applies, is that you have to pay your bills on time and keep your credit rating high, so that you are able to get more loans for your business, more funding, which will help you to grow. Excuse me, I'm so sorry.
That's okay. Yeah.
Got a little bug in my throat there. Yeah, it's getting better. It's going away. So yeah. So credit, yeah, it's important.
So you wanted to talk about examples of where Blacks have moved to build economic wealth, and then the implications of that. So why don't you talk about the effort, the successful effort for a while to build economic power, in this case through one of the best examples, Black Wall Street. Why don't you talk about what that represented, how that happened, why that's important?
Well, in the early 1900s, in Greenwood, the Greenwood district of Tulsa, Oklahoma, there was this symbol of Black excellence and economic independence and community strength. As you mentioned, Black Wall Street, we've all heard the term. This thriving hub of Black professionals and schools and culture was one of the most prosperous African American communities in the United States. But in 1921, it was destroyed violently in a race massacre. There's different versions of why it started, but there was a lot of bad feelings towards this community of Black people that had come together and decided that they were going to use their money to build their community. They built schools and banks and law offices and grocery stores and theaters, and they circulated their money in their community and created jobs for one another. And so that is a very powerful example of what happens when access meets ambition. When you have, all these people coming together to spend their money for basically a common purpose, and fast forward to today, the need for Black entrepreneurship is still just as important. It's just as urgent for us to have and build. Sorry, I lost our feed there. Did I? There you are. Yeah. It's just as important today so that we can control our financial destinies. Again, as we mentioned earlier, it means owning the land and the building and the decisions. And owning a business, it can be a game changer because there's so many things that comes along that is the benefit of Black entrepreneurship. There's job creation and representation, cultural power, and community involvement. So it's important for us to continue to support our communities and support our Black businesses and to strengthen our communities. And also it helps towards that closing that wealth gap. And again, back to building that generational wealth, because that's where, when we talk about the 1%, generally it's because these are wealthy families that have passed their money along to their generations. Their money stays within their families. And that's something that we in our communities need more of. So that, keep our, we can pass that down. And so our kids won't have to struggle. I think somewhere maybe they say this generation is the one is not going to do it. They always say this generation is not going to do as well as the last one. And that's a sad tale. That's not how it should work. We need to keep passing on that generational wealth.
Well, that part is true. And now it's not just true for us, it's true for whites as well. Not true for Asians. Because what's happened is the rich have carried out policies that have devastated not only us, but them. And that's partially why Trump's in office, except they think he's going to help them recover, and he's doing the big steal. So that is a real tragedy. And that's the nature of the American enterprise, because this is a declining capitalist system, and it's declining in terms of global power shifting in the world, mainly to China, and soon to Africa. Soon, the majority of people on this planet are going to come from Africa. It's the fastest growing population with the greatest wealth on the planet that we need to get control of. So unfortunately, that is the truth. And that truth is coming from the way in which this country has been mismanaged by the rich. So more and more power and money gets concentrated in the hands of the very few. There's a question here from Brother Ogawa. Question: networking and financial literacy go hand in hand. How can a group of friends enhance their financial foundation by working as a cohesive unit? Got any answers, ideas on that, Joy?
Well, the first thing that came to mind, and I think I forget where somebody said, and it is an African tradition, and is what we call the susu. And that is a very effective way for a group to help, to save money collectively. So for anyone who isn't familiar with it, it's every time period, whether it be a week, a month, you get a hand. So you put in, everyone's pay puts in a certain amount, and then at every month or week, someone gets the whole pot. And so it's kind of, it's an old fashioned, as I said, African tradition of way of helping, to save collectively. So that's one small way. Then another way I can think of, if you're talking about network or in terms of a group, is forming investment groups. Where again you put in your money and you invest in certain, whether it be land, business, stocks, whatever. Again, cautionary that investing is not a short-term thing. This is something that you're in for the long haul. But it is, money is power, and when you do it as a group, you have more strength. The strength in numbers. That's the term I was trying to remember.
Yeah, those are two good ones. And in Jamaica, they call susu partner.
Partner. Yes, that is correct.
Same thing. We don't have that tradition here because in the Caribbean and in Africa, where it comes from, but in the Caribbean, more traditional African stuff continued. And so that is an important one. So we would have to revitalize that idea and get people together. And you'd have to get groups of people that can trust each other so that those pots can go around. But that's a very important one.
I know people do it here. The people that I do know do it here generally are from the Caribbean. I know people do it at their jobs, where they so it's kind of, everyone knows when payday is, and kind of everybody knows when the turn is. And so, it's collective saving. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And there are other ways that people who know each other and develop some kind of trust can pool resources. It could be for a business.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things that I would suggest is the best format for a business is cooperatives, where everyone has a kind of equal say-so in the business. But I'm not saying that individually owned businesses shouldn't operate. Most of our businesses are of that nature, and we should support them. But whatever it is, if you've got the trust, you can pool some wealth. There's
or even resources, if you have a group and you want to start a business. I know sometimes, it's tough when it's more than one, when you're dealing with more, but if you have the finances and you have the know-how, and you kind of, use everyone's strengths to come together to build and to grow, that's always great.
Yeah. Gloria Briscoe has a question. Do men discuss money issues amongst themselves?
I'll leave that one for you, Shaka. I'm not a man.
Yeah. We sure do. And it depends on the consciousness of the men, in terms of what levels that goes to. In my circle of men, they've been kind of trained by me, as a matter of fact, to be self-reliant. So that's a cardinal principle in how we behave. So this is particularly coming out of people who are in a group. And so that commitment to self-reliance, which means fundamentally that the money is usually coming from Black people. It doesn't always have to come from it, but usually is. It saved us. We run a school. People watch the show know it's been in operation since 1972. And it's financed through the tuition of parents, and they pay the staff. And for a long time, we operated out of our building. Now we operated out of one of the members' buildings. But then there's a time where money came to independent Black schools from other sources, charter schools. And almost, because you had a network of independent Black schools called CB, Council for Independent Black Institutions. It was formed by a good friend of mine, G2 Wausi, who comes from Brooklyn. There's a street fair that they have every year that he set up. And he ran a school called Uhuru Sasa. So virtually all the schools, and it was a network of independent Black schools around the country, they went for this money. And within 3 or 4 years, all these schools were finished. Because you come under someone's money, you come under their rules. And so then they started violating them on certain things. And then one sister that I know that ran a school in East Palo Alto for 20 years, she lost her school. You know what I mean? So within the conscious circle, that's one discussion. But men do discuss money, and on different levels, depending upon what level the men's group or men are at. Some have a lot of money, and they talk about that. Most don't. They talk about that. So yeah, I'd say men definitely do. Pamela Hurley, your sister, my wife has just bumped in. She said in different Caribbean islands, it's called by many names. In Barbados, it's called meeting. In Jamaica, it's called partner.
That's right.
In other Caribbean islands, it's called, as already stated, susu. So yeah, that's one that we need to get in operation here. And there was another comment here. See if there's any other. Oh, this one from Wolf Manlu. What percentage of assets needs to be in the form of precious metals to offset future currency changes? What's your views on that? Joy,
Yes,
there's
I'm
no
sorry.
sound. Yeah.
Yes, I'm sorry. I got it. I'm not sure about how much, and that I don't know about the price of metals, so I couldn't answer that specifically. Although I do know that they, investing in gold is advisable as opposed to other precious metals, and so that much I do know.
Yeah, definitely gold, because the way the economy's gone is the economy's had flips and flops. Gold has gone way up. It's over $2,000 an ounce right now. So if you have anything in gold, it's worth a lot more. It could go down, but basically it's been more stable than Bitcoins, for example. But I think there's a whole philosophy on that one. You got any ideas on Bitcoins?
I know it's up. It's very volatile. I know my sister's son Kojo, as you mentioned, he's very big into the cryptocurrency, which I do think it is it is something that is part of the future. It is the wave of the future. Unfortunately, it is very unstable and at the moment. But I know that in recent months it had gone up since our current administration admit the that has risen. I just my one thing on crypto is I tell people, just like anything else, I think it is worth investing into, but just proceed with caution.
and have a gambler's instinct
Well,
because of its volatility. I have an
mhm.
accountant who lost 300,000 on crypto. Now I don't know if he's able to recover anything on that, but one, you need to be able to be in a position where you can afford a loss and hang in for the long term. And I'm into business,
All right.
but I'm not a gambler. When I go, I tell people, Pam and I, the last time we went to Vegas, I put 25 cents in the slot machine. Nobody wins on the slot machines except the owners of the casino. Yeah, a few people win, and most of them go back and spend it back, but those few amount to nobody wins. And that's what Steve Wynn, who's one of the biggest owners in Vegas, says. He says, nobody makes money in Vegas except us. Listen
And
to him.
the
You know what I
house
mean?
always wins, right?
Yeah.
Agreed. I mean, it's just like crypto investing. Again, it is a gamble. That is the downside of it. Now, the upside is that if you have money, you put in and you have patience, you can reap the rewards. But you can also lose your shirt, and that is unfortunate. And then when our markets are as unstable as they are currently, I mean, look at it yesterday. They lost 800 points, because of everything that's happening over there in Israel. It is hard. So again, I tell, it's just like you said, it's like gambling. You shouldn't bet more than you can lose, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So then you
Yeah.
can afford to lose. So but I would say that if you can invest small amounts regularly, that is the way to build at least a nice nest egg for yourself in the future. It doesn't have to be a lot, but it does have to be consistent. And again, the best way to build wealth is time. So, to the young people, if you put $10 now every week in an account and don't touch it, by the time you're 65, based on compound interest, you'd be surprised, and I can calculate it if you want, but you'd be surprised at what you would have in 10, 20, 30 years if you just have some patience. But yeah, so it's the same thing applies to the crypto.
Now you were talking about Black Wall Street
Mhm.
and the example of blacks actually building up a successful economic model. I should point out, and I pointed this out in a previous show, capitalism has its origin in slavery, and it starts in the East India Company, the Dutch East India Company, which immediately was picked up by the British. And in both cases, Wall Street was formed, where people invested stocks in us. So you need to understand that the very origin of capitalism is on your blood, sweat, and tears. And now you're in a position where you are, next to Native Americans, you're on the bottom when it comes to economics.
All right.
So you need to understand why there's a system there. And in the case of Black Wall Street, as you described, as blacks built up a successful community based on black business ownership, then the white community came in, and it wasn't just individual whites. It was the sheriff, it was leading people in the city and the state, bombed the community and everything else, and wiped it out. And so one of the things that we got to be aware of, and it's similar to the way in which Black communities have been wiped out in other ways, through redevelopment and other things. But in the case of Black Wall Street, it was wiped out. Blacks rebuilt it. And then what happened? The city came through and said they were going to run a freeway through the new Black Wall Street, and they would relocate the Black community. Well, they ran the freeway through, and there was no relocation. And now you've got a mayor of that city who's Black, who is going out and trying to raise $100 million to empower Blacks, pay back to some of the families that lost their money, but use this for economic development. And that's good. But the real payback should come from the people that did the destruction. You know what I mean? I mean, Israel gets paid back for the lives they lost, Second World War through the Nazis. The Japanese only got 25,000. You're talking reparations there, and we have a whole reparations movement here. But when damage is done to a people, then those that cause the damage should be the ones that pay it back. And it's nice to go raise some money. That's good. But that's the key. But the key point I think that's important here is that Blacks built something, and it didn't happen just in Black Wall Street. There were a number of Black Wall Streets like that. And then there was an attack, a violent attack to wipe it out. So it says, and there was an effort by Blacks to defend themselves. So I also want to say that. And because of the rumor of a rape and everything else, and Blacks came armed, and, they tried to defend themselves. But what ended up happening is the overwhelming power of the state overwhelmed them. Machine guns, bombs from planes, and everything else. So one of the things we have to look at is whether we're building a community, economic community, whether it's a family, whether it's an individual, you got to be able to secure it. And it's not going to be easy, given the nature of this state. Malcolm X, one of the things that was left out of the autobiography was the piece on economics, where he talked about the need to defend the businesses that we build. So we have to have more effective methods for defense, because the residuals of slavery means that a lot of white people think they're entitled to what you have. And Trump definitely feels that way. Take whatever you got, you know what I mean? And put it under diversity, equity, and inclusion. The only person that I think that is benefiting from that, white women and people like Trump, who are completely unqualified to occupy the offices that they occupy, by the way, who have committed crimes and have been able to avoid it. That if we just looked at a hamburger, we go to jail. And he tries to overthrow the government, and he's talking about he wants to catch the criminals at the border, So
my favorite is that.
Anything else you want to say on this example of Black Wall Street and Black Wall Streets?
Only that that we, that it's we should definitely keep that idea in mind, even in our own communities, and and help to maybe not to replicate some that kind of spirit, that building from within instead of waiting on outside help. That relying on the community. The legacy of Black Wall Street is more than history. It's almost like a blueprint that it can show us that we already have what we need. We have creativity, we have resilience, and we have community, and that we should keep that spirit in mind going forward, so that we can build something for ourselves and again, pay that forward.
Yeah, one of the things that's real clear is that if you look at movements of resistance, not all, but many of the most fearless people, those that struck fear in the hearts of whites, and we're talking about the bowels of the South especially, many of them came from landowning families, where there was a level of independence that they had that took them out of the subservient position, whether it was doing the labor for whites or behaving in a subservient way. Now, some blacks who come from the poorest conditions that had nothing had that same spirit, but that fosters a strength inside of black people, when you've got that
Right.
kind of economic self-reliance. The final point that I want to deal with you is what you call the legacy of Black entrepreneurship and how it can uplift and transform Black communities. So
Right.
talk something about how the development of Black businesses and Black communities can help in terms of transforming and uplifting Black communities.
Well, I mean, it's basically what we, the legacy is what we've been talking about. Excuse me, I'm just trying to plug in my computer so I don't lose you. Sorry. But that we, economic empowerment and freedom, that is the legacy that we want to leave our kids, to be strong and economically strong as well. Hold on, I'm sorry. Just plugging in here. Okay. Yes. Right. So, because we want to avoid a lot of the same mistakes that we made in the past, right? So, we want, and being financially literate, it will help us to avoid those, as mentioned before, those predatory lending practices, those redlining, and not being able to have home ownership, start businesses. These are the things that, again, as we mentioned, will lead us to that generational wealth and leave those legacies behind. So the more financial literate we are now, the better it helps our kids, our grandkids, and our communities going forward. So, we want to empower our kids to learn and to learn as much as they can. And so, and you mentioned family, these help keep financial literacy, does even help to keep our families together and keep those families strong instead of being separated due to financial, not low income. We see that happen a lot where families get separated because honestly they can't, a mother maybe can't afford to keep all her kids, or it helps to us to demand more education in our schools and better resources. It allows us to, as I said, make better decisions when it comes to where we want to live, where we want to buy a home, where we want to send our kids to school. So it as I said in the beginning, money is a skill. It's something that we need to have and need to be able to use wisely. So we need to understand all the components of it, whether it's savings, budgeting, investing, all of those things. And of course, as I mentioned, too, giving back to our community. That's always a big thing because I think that is very important. As I laid out in my book, with Jailers Juice Bar, you'll see that I have all the sections. And one of the first things that about my Jailers Juice Bar, as I didn't mention, is that it is named after my niece, right? When they talk about family, she, and I was inspired to write it because she she told me she wanted to open a restaurant. She was about 13 at the time, and she had it all laid out. And so I was really inspired to write, and I wanted to make a blueprint for her that maybe when she got older, she could look back and say, hey, this is something that my Auntie Joy did for me. And so it also mentions about, she mentions in the book that she put her secret ingredient in her juice is a something that she saw her nana use from, that she was inspired from back in the Caribbean, which is this thing called, and most people know it's called Angostura bitters. She talks about how she builds a business plan, and she has all the steps. So I think it's important that we teach our kids all of these things, and they see even sometimes the struggles that we go through, to make ends meet. All of those things are important so that they understand, and so that not only they can be strong financially, but they can pass that on to the next generation.
Yeah, and I observed as an organizer, and then also looking at Black businesses, that Black businesses, particularly when they're owned by conscious owners. I'll give one example. In the Fillmore, was a brother named Wesley Johnson. Wesley Johnson was a very proud Black man from Texas, always wore a 10-gallon cowboy hat, cowboy boots, was clean in the way he dressed. He owned 2 nightclubs. One was the Texas Playhouse and another one. And then he bought a building for his son, who was a pharmacist, And then when I moved to form the group that's now Pan-African People's Organization, he was a part of a group of businesses that I got to finance the organization when it started. So I wanted to demonstrate that the Black community would finance its own organizations. This is in 1966, when a lot of the groups were dependent upon money from foundations and stuff like that. So because he was conscious, he made that kind of commitment. And there are a lot of business owners who are like that, who will make a contribution to the Black community. And there were many others as well. You're on mute. Go off of mute.
Yeah, it's a noise in the background. I didn't want you to hear, so I'm gonna just mute while you talk. Okay.
Okay. Yeah. So that's one example. And then if you look at organizations that have a financial economic base, the Garvey movement, for example, the Nation of Islam, those groups had some financial means that gave them some independence. And in the case of Garvey, these were a bunch of small businesses in different parts of the country, sustained by Southern Blacks who had moved north, and in some cases by Blacks in the South, where most of his members were. So that financial independence gave them power, And so, I'd say that that's extremely important. I just wanted to wrap up, and Joy, you can comment on this as well, on the African legacy of economic development. And for example, at the end of enslavement, Blacks in this country, particularly by the 1870s, when Blacks were really moved out of the ballot box completely in what's called the Hayes-Tilden Compromise, in a close election between Hayes and Tilden, Hayes a Republican, Tilden a Democrat. The election was so close it went to the House. And then in the House, the House of Representatives picked Hayes on condition that he give the South home rule, meaning give whites the power to reinstitute a new form of slavery. And that was sharecropping, that was Jim Crow, that was segregation. So when that happened, a lot of Blacks who were already moving in this direction saw that an extremely important way to build power was economics. And the most important institution, I've covered this before in some previous shows, and it's in my book that's coming out pretty soon, Seba and Sodiah.
Hmm.
They used secret societies. That was the main institution coming out of Africa that was used to rebuild Black communities in the South and in other parts of the country. And it usually came out of burial societies because all Blacks placed a great deal of importance on having insurance that would ensure their burial.
Hmm.
That in turn became insurance companies, $100 million, multi-$100 million insurance companies. So the model coming from Africa, the secret societies were actually educational systems starting in Egypt and in other parts of Africa. It actually started in Africa and then in Egypt. It was an educational system for passing on African culture. And it was also a system for seeing that under colonialism, you didn't lose your culture. And it was also a system for resisting slavery. And that system was preserved throughout enslavement. And most people don't know it because it was secret. Blacks kept it secret. So you saw it come into being at the end of enslavement. One of the principles that Africans operated on, and I think this is one that we need to understand, and it's a key reason we survived, is communalism, or the idea that land, air, and water should not belong to any individual or to a government. It's free. And what people should do with that land is pass it on in better condition, air and water, than they received it. So that Africans were dealing with the environment long before they had any pollution problems. So in this country and in the Caribbean, where you could not, where there was no communal system of sharing land, but there was land ownership, it was a communal ethos that kept us going. The idea of sharing, that if somebody needed something, if you had 3 eggs, 2 of them might go to a stranger, at least one, that idea of sharing. But in the end, the ultimate idea is that as we reconstruct societies, we need to rid ourselves of these ideas that a tree can be owned. By the way, trees are spirits. Everything God creates a spirit. My neighbor, he doesn't like me mention his name because he likes to be on the QT, so I won't mention his name. He was having his trees trimmed. And his wife said, honey, that tree's a spirit. They might not like you trimming them. You should be careful. Days later, the guy who was climbing up the tree fell off. Now, was that an accident? I don't know. But the idea that you can own water, that you can own land, the idea that you have to pay for water, bottled, which further pollutes the cosmos, Earth, and very often tap water that they're selling back to you. Because I've had the waters tested in the bottle, and the only one that I've found, and I'm not trying to plug them, is Crystal Geyser. It's the only one that passed the test. And that's the water, this Crystal Geyser. I'm not saying go buy this. I'm just, because I don't work for no Crystal Geyser.
That's right.
Point is, got you paying for water. You know what I mean? Huh? That's God-given. And now there's a water shortage in this country. Across the country, water tables are at a very low level because corporations have come in and sucked up a lot of water in different ways. So this communal ethos and this communal idea is something that we need to revive families, communities, and nations. Long term, when we set up our own societies, it needs to be based on that. Private property, that is the idea that land, air, and water could be owned. Not a house, you can have your own house, not your clothes, not your property, but the essentials for life, the idea that can be privately owned is evil. And it's been really the basis for creating the rich and the poor. So I'm just saying that long term, we need to really understand that. Is there anything you want to say as we conclude this, and also tell people how they can get your books?
Well, I want to say thanks once, of course, for you having me on your show. And I want to again stress, financial literacy to, teach your kids about money. Start from early. Open a savings account. That's one thing my father did for me, that when I was about 12, he took me to the bank, showed me how to use back then it was a passbook. But there's tons of information out there. There's apps for to help parents if you're with giving kids control over money, so that you can help them control their spending and saving. Encourage them to grow up to have their own money, and to learn as much as you can, in terms of learning about investing, retirement, insurance, life insurance. Another thing that a lot of people don't know about, which is also something that will help you long term. And a lot of people don't know you can, against certain policies, you can even borrow against them. So it's worth it to have. So these are, educate yourself, find out as much as you can, talk to your financial advisor if you have one, and really try to learn, how to make better decisions for your money. And in terms of me, like, if you want to contact me, you can go to my website, colorsconsultinggroup.com. I have tons of resources there. You can also pick up a copy of Jailer's Juice Bar, as well as the Kids Financial Dictionary. And I do have another book coming out called Z's Garage, which is based on my nephew. All of my books, it's a series, my young entrepreneurship series. And all of them are based on my nieces and nephews, because I live for them. Auntie loves you. And yeah, I also have some free resources, worksheets that you can download. They're great for kids 8 to 13, and anyone who just wants to learn more about financial literacy and numbers, hands-on activities, interactive learning through play. And I have and it's coming out soon. I have a subscription box that will also have these worksheets that you can download monthly, and they all have different themes: budgeting, travel budgeting for the summer, back to school budgeting, entrepreneurship. So you can find out all about those different things at my website, as I mentioned. That is colorsconsultinggroup.com, and you can follow me on Instagram at The Joy of Numbers. Yeah.
Right on. That's one of the things I really like about you is your name, Joy, and then you have a passion, and it's obvious in what you do. I think everybody that watched this and watched you, they can see that this is just a lot more than just something you do. This is something you really love doing.
I do. And they say that when you love what you do, you don't work a day in your life. So that is, and I think that is one of the, and I hope that next time we talk, when I think we did mention talking about starting a business. One of the key things, if you want to ask me, the first thing you need to start a business, it's not money, it's passion. Yeah. Right? You got to have passion for what you're doing, because it's a long road. And so you got to love it if you want to do it.
Mm-hmm. Right on. Yeah, well, that's obvious with you. There's just one comment here made by CME1. We should be Pan-African in all we do. Our HBCUs, historically Black colleges and universities, and African universities could be used as nonprofit, then transfer to for-profit companies in Africa. That's how Ivy League institutions work. That's a good concept he's got there of
that is interesting
in Africa. That's a real good concept. What do you think of that in terms of from nonprofit to for-profit companies, educational institutions?
Well, I mean, I guess if they're, now are they going to be owned when these owned by Africans? Is that
Yeah,
what
good.
you're saying, right?
Yeah, good question. Yeah, I would hope so. But
I
also the
mean,
question, yeah, go ahead.
no, go ahead.
The question is, but now college is so expensive that it's operating on the corporate principle when it used to be nearly free,
Nearly free.
particularly state institutions. I mean, it's hard for a Black college, which has to generate the money to provide just free education, though the state, in some cases, the federal government, in some cases, provides funding. So, but the idea of having branches in Africa or the Caribbean, I think that's an excellent idea. You know?
Well, I mean, I'm not sure about the educational system in Africa. I know in the Caribbean we have some, we definitely have great schools. Who profits from them? I may not be, privy to that information. Um, but I know I agree that education should be free. However, I understand that the cost of it may, someone has to pay for it. Now, if the governments are they willing to subsidize do they subsidize the historically black the HBCUs and as much as they do other schools? I guess that's a question I could ask you.
Does this government do that? You mean?
Well,
Is that
not this, I would assume this government doesn't. They're cutting
no?
funding
They
for.
do. They do.
They do.
Yeah, particularly Howard is a major recipient of federal money, but a huge number of historically Black colleges and universities do receive government money. When they were first set up, they were set up through philanthropy. And for a variety of reasons, the federal government did not want to invest anything in Black people. But yeah, they do. And then there's other ways that they generate money. But they have some outstanding Black colleges. They produce most of our doctors, engineers, scientists, and yet more Blacks go to non-Black colleges than go to Black colleges. But the seriousness of that, when it comes to the technical stuff, they're very strong in that. And then having Black professors, that's a big deal, who actually care for you and look out for you, So, yeah. Okay, that's it. Joe, I really want to thank you. That was brilliant. I learned a lot. I got some notes here that I took.
Well, well, it's always a pleasure to talk to you. I learn something every time I talk to you, so I think that's fantastic.
That's mutual. So I hope people got something out of this. This is for your empowerment. And on July 19th, Joy will be back to discuss building businesses, how you set them up, how you operate them, blah, blah. Real important.
It is.
Check that out.
Most businesses fail in the first year, so it's important to lay that good foundation. So, check us out in the next episode, and next time on July 19th, as he mentioned, we'll go over some of those steps, some of those foundational steps. Yes.
Right on. Okay. Thank you, lady.
Thank you, Shaka. Well, you enjoy, and thank you for having me once again. Look forward to doing it again.
Right on. Same here.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Everybody. Bye.